Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast on accessibility and publishing. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director of the Charleston Conference, and I'm so glad that you've joined us here today. We have a great panel of people here to talk with us. Matthew Ismail is going to be our moderator, and I'll turn it over to him in just a moment. But before we get there, just a few orders of business, a few notes here. The webinar is in listen-only mode, and so we won't be able to hear you speak, but we do have a live chat that's available for you to talk with each other and to send us questions. So I will be available to answer those attendee chat questions as the presenters are going through their talks. For any questions to the presenters about the content of the webinar, there's a green question mark icon that will be used to ask the presenter a question. We'll hold those questions till the very end, and Matthew will be the facilitator for the Q&A section. So if you have questions on the webinar, please do hold those by using the green question mark icon, and we'll address all the questions for the panel at the end. If you're having trouble with your audio, if you're using your computer audio and you're having trouble hearing, you can try to connect using your phone by using the little gray phone icon to switch to telephone audio. But if you have further problems with the audio or any issues, again, you can use the attendee chat button, and I'll try to help sort that out. This webcast is being recorded, and it's going to be made available on the Charleston Conference website within just a few days. We'll have all the slides and contact information for everyone available at that time. So just really quick, as we're kicking off here, can you let us know what type of attendee you are? Are you a librarian, a publisher, vendor, consultant? If it's something that doesn't fall into any of those categories, let us know in the chat box what the other category is. And you can also use that chat box to just say hello and where you're from so that we can, that's okay, Matt, no oops there. Just, you can say hi, where you're dialing in from today. So it looks like mostly librarians, 63, 64%, kind of going back and forth, 20% publishers, 11% vendor, 1% consultants, and 4% other. Hi, Adrienne from De Gruyter. Hi, Janice, librarian from Vancouver. Amanda, vendor, YBP Library Services. All right, that looks like it's kind of settling out now. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Looks like we're settling out at 59% librarian, 58, and turn this over to Matthew so that he can do his intro for the panel. And I'm going to turn off my webcam and microphone, but I'll still be here in the chat saying hello to everybody. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Leah. I'm Matthew Ismail. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Charleston Briefings series published by ATG Media. The publication behind this webinar is the Accessibility in Publishing by Stefan Rosen, who will introduce herself later. This volume was published in the fall and launched at the Charleston Conference. So first, let me just ask, what is the Charleston Briefings? And here's the description from our website. The Charleston Briefings, Trending Topics for Information Professionals, is a thought-provoking series of brief books concerning innovation in the sphere of libraries, publishing and technology, and scholarly communication. The briefings, growing out of the vital conversations characteristic of the Charleston Conference and Against the Grain, will offer valuable insights into the trends shaping our professional lives and institutions in which we work. And Stephane's panel at the 2018 Charleston Conference addressed this same topic as her briefing: accessibility in publishing, practices for equitable access, and maximum impact. Now, I'd like to note that the Charleston Briefings are open access and free for anyone, anywhere to read. And we'd like to thank our sponsor for Stephane's volume, EBSCO eBooks, for this generous support. It's the support of sponsors like EBSCO that allow us to continue to publish the briefing series online and open access. So, on to the panel.
I'm going to jump in here while we're transitioning to the next speaker and do an additional poll question. Let's see. What is your level of familiarity with accessibility in general? Are you a beginner? Are you somewhat familiar, very familiar, or are you an expert already and you don't even need this webinar? Oh, there's an expert in the room. All right. 12% beginner, 64% somewhat familiar, 22% very familiar, 1% expert. All right, thank you very much for participating in that poll, everyone.
Okay, so I'm the first presenter, so I'll begin. My name is Susan Doerr. I'm the Assistant Director at the University of Minnesota Press, and I specialize in digital publishing and operations. For those of you who are not familiar with my press, we publish around 120 books a year, as well as 12 journals in the humanities and the social sciences. And we have a web-based publishing platform called Manifold. Our path into accessibility began with Bookshare. In 2011, we sent all of our digital book files to Bookshare to make them available to readers with disabilities. Then a few years later, in 2015, we began to work on Manifold, our web-based publishing platform, which led us to reopen the topic of accessibility workflows with our books at the University of Minnesota Press. As you can see here, those who use Manifold to publish content to the web can make enhanced books. They can make OERs, journals, handbooks, conference proceedings, and other publications. So to accommodate all these different use cases, Manifold can ingest EPUB, Markdown, HTML, Google Docs, and Word files. And all of those file types can hold alt text metadata, which can describe illustrated content. So readers who are using assistive technology can experience the full content of a book. I come to you with two perspectives. One is as the platform creator for Manifold, and then the other as a content creator, as a publisher. And so our work with accessibility at the University of Minnesota Press has had to encompass both of these things. For the platform, for Manifold, we need to make the platform itself accessible to users of assistive technology. And that means we need to make development choices that allow for the easiest and best navigation through the site. In 2018, our developers focused on the screen reader experience. And our goal was to make Manifold compliant with the WCAG single A rating, which we think we have accomplished, though we've never formally had that tested and certified. There's a link that talks about what the developers did. And if you are interested in reading that blog post written by Blake Mason, one of our developers, you can go ahead and do that. The goal was to make the platform accessible for screen readers. But when I look at the other perspective that I bring to you as a publisher, there's been more and different work that we've had to do. As we make our books available through Bookshares, we also make our books available to institutions that reach out to us directly when they request an EPUB file, or for older books, a PDF. But we've needed to change our editorial and our production workflows in order to create EPUB 3 files that are accessible. We're starting simply. We're focusing on metadata with alt text, better captions, and long descriptions. But we've also had to make changes to our workflows in order to collect the data that we need. We're asking our authors to create this metadata and deliver it to us with their manuscript. So in order to consider a final manuscript fully final, we need this additional metadata with alt text, with long descriptions, and with better captions. We have our editorial staff who code our manuscripts for our production workflow tool, create and incorporate that into the manuscript. They code it as alt text, and the workflow tool then can take it all the way through its process. The production workflow tool set that we use is Scribe's well-formed document workflow, and it can accommodate these accessibility workflow needs. So our production staff don't need to take additional steps or use additional software. Rather, they're working in the tool set that they already have with this enriched manuscript, and what comes out is an EPUB file with this metadata. The greatest challenge that we face in doing this work really is time. Time for the author to create the metadata we need, time for our manuscript formatter and editorial, and time for our production staff. But we believe this is an important priority, and so we make the time, and it's worth it. But also, we believe that the work we're doing to make our files accessible are also going to be usable in the preservation process. We think all this additional metadata will be useful in providing context for preservation down the line. So when we look at the return on investment for this time, we say that it's both for accessibility, which expands our readership, and for preservation, making these works long-term readable. The last slide offers a few resources for people who are getting started with accessibility. It probably won't help you experts out there, but for those of you who are looking for tools, whether to get started or to enhance what you already know, here are a few that we recommend and that we're using ourselves from the BISG Quick Start Guide, as well as the Accessibility Metadata Projects resources. We also recommend to our authors, if they need help in learning how to create the metadata that we need, that they go to the resources to caption videos for yourself, or also for the Poets Diagram Center's tool in learning how to write accessible descriptions. Then, of course, there's the ACE EPUB checker from Daisy. And now I will pass this on to Stephanie.
Hi again, everybody. While Stephanie's getting ready, we're going to have another poll question. Which of the following best describes your primary role with regard to accessibility? Disability support services, librarians supporting patrons' use of electronic resources in my library, faculty member assigning e-resources for course reading, publisher creating ebook content or other. And actually that librarian line got cut off. So let me see if I can find the other text, because it talks about acquisitions, end of that as well. And I'm not seeing it. But anyway, that was supposed to include acquisitions work as well in the librarian choice. So 5% disability support services, 56% librarians supporting patrons' use, no faculty members, 21% publishers creating ebook content, 17% other. Please specify. So there's lots of stuff going on in the chat over here. Hi, Curtis. I just scrolled past your answer there. Product manager, consultant. I make specs and recommendations to clients around accessibility. Brandy, responsible for accessibility software and application requirements. Interesting. All right, I think things have kind of settled out there. So I'm going to close this poll and turn it over to Stephanie. Thanks again for everyone participating.
Thank you. Hello, everyone out there. I'm Stefan Rosen, and I'll start out by saying a little bit about what I do and how I got into this work. So I'm currently the accessibility specialist at the University of Michigan Library. This means that I collaborate with colleagues in all areas of our library, from collections to publishing, operations to instruction, to make our services and resources more accessible for more people. And I keep up with accessibility standards and best practices and research from disability studies and on disability and access. A little bit about how I got into this work. I learned about digital accessibility when I was doing my graduate work at the University of Texas, Austin. I was connected to the digital writing and research lab at that institution. And that lab was actually started as a computers and writing center in the 90s. And one of its founders was active in computers, writing, and rhetoric on the one hand, and web accessibility on the other hand, because he was experiencing progressive vision loss at the time. That John Slayton is that co-founder. So in that role, I started consulting with faculty and students to apply web accessibility standards like the WCAG standard that was mentioned to their research and teaching applications. And from there, I became more interested in disability studies and the intersection of accessibility and digital scholarship. The past year, I wrote the Accessibility in Publishing book, which Matthew mentioned. Here it is. You can read it online, open access, or you can order a physical copy. But that tries to take stock of the different activities that currently go into making publications accessible, especially to readers with print disabilities, and looks at promising practices that publishers and scholars can adopt to make publications more accessible going forward. But for today's content, I'll be focusing on my perspective as a librarian serving patrons, although our library is also a publisher and a platform developer too. So for the patrons we serve, the library is the last leg of content delivery, face-to-face with the end users. And whatever format our books, journals, and articles are in, it's our responsibility to provide a format that our patrons with disabilities can use. This is especially important for patrons with print disabilities. I see some folks saying it's hard to hear me, and I'm going to move my microphone closer and hope that that helps. So this is especially important for patrons with print disabilities, that is, disabilities that affect the ability to use or read standard print, like visual impairments, motor impairments, reading or learning disabilities. So these patrons may rely on audio formats, braille, or large print. And fortunately, modern electronic formats, when they're built for accessibility, in line with accessibility standards, can be easily converted to these formats, speech or braille or large print, with readily available software. So we acquire or locally create accessible electronic formats for these patrons. It's our responsibility to do this under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's also our obligation to do this according to the professional values of librarianship. And I just wanted to touch on that quickly. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires that no qualified individual with a disability shall, by reason of such disability, be excluded from participation or denied the benefits of services, programs, or activities of a public entity. So public entity, that's us, a state institution, and this also applies to private colleges and universities, other libraries, and cultural heritage institutions. So this means that we try to comply with accessibility standards as much as possible, and when necessary, provide accommodations. Meanwhile, the American Library Association core values of librarianship reminds us that all information resources, regardless of technology, format, or methods of delivery, should be readily, equally, and equitably accessible to all users. So this is just some background to say why we do this, why we ensure that patrons with print disabilities have equitable access to our collections. And now I'll say a little bit about the how of doing this. So much of our collection is already digital, licensed from vendors or hosted locally, and some of this is accessible according to the standards and usable according to our patrons who rely on assistive technology, but very much of it is not. And of course, our print collection is inherently not accessible to patrons with print disabilities. So when a patron needs to use an item that's not already in a format accessible to them, we pursue a series of actions to acquire or create an accessible copy. Broadly, these actions fall into 3 categories. So sometimes we look to specialized databases that can include HathiTrust, Bookshare, Access Text. Bookshare and Access Text are for users with print disabilities in particular, and HathiTrust allows additional access for users with print disabilities. So that's one ready source of what we need. Sometimes we pursue local conversion of our print collection or items received through interlibrary loans. And sometimes by request, we go directly back to a vendor or publisher to get an accessible electronic file. So the result of these actions is that the patron gets what they need. The turnaround time can vary from immediate to up to 2 weeks, and the quality can vary from a born accessible file from the publisher to a local scan through our document delivery office. So it's not exactly good enough, but this is where we're at now. And I hope that we're looking towards a future in which new publications are born accessible, platforms are accessible to users of assistive technology, and much of this remediation work becomes unnecessary. And as a library, we can focus on making our other types of collections accessible and kind of merging those values of preservation and accessibility that we heard of from Susan. I also have a few resources today. The first is a briefing on accessibility, the Chafee Amendment, and fair use. So this can help you understand what a library can do to make content accessible in the context of copyright law. The second is the spec kit from the Association of Research Libraries on Accessibility and Universal Design. And this is a survey of what libraries are doing now. So a very useful snapshot of the profession. The third is accessibility and publishing, my book through the Charleston Briefings series. And lastly, the Describing Visual Resources Toolkit. So this is something we produced, a partnership between the University of Michigan Press, our University of Michigan Library, and a network of experts from various fields came together to create resources to help authors and editors and publishers think about how to create quality textual description of visual content in the context of academic arts and humanities publishing. So that toolkit is available on the web for anyone to look at, and hopefully especially useful for scholars and publishers. I'll have to follow up to get the links out to our audience directly so you can find these on your own. And I see that they will be provided. So that's the end for my presentation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we're going to do another poll question here in the transition about inquiries and requests or accessibility. When fielding inquiries and requests, how confident do you feel about meeting or about being able to meet the user's request? Very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or not confident at all. Pretty good spread here. 2% very confident, around 57% somewhat confident, 36% not very confident, 6% not confident at all. It's kind of varying a little bit, but that's roughly it. Thank you for your participation again. Cindy, I see a question about readers in the library. If it's okay, we're going to hold that till the end, and we'll hold questions till the end of the presentation and let everybody speak then. And for now, we're going to go to Emma. Thank you, Emma.
Good afternoon. My name is Emma Waecker, and I'm the Senior Product Manager for EBSCO eBooks. Our platform, EBSCO Host, provides access to over 1 million ebooks to about 100,000 users per day. So given the vast amount of content we serve to our users around the world, we know that if we aren't accounting for accessibility, we're preventing a significant percentage of users from getting what they need from their library's resources, which is easy access to the information they need to achieve their academic, personal, and professional goals. The WHO reports that 253 million people worldwide are blind or have low vision, and they expect the U.S. blind and low vision population to double by 2050 due to our aging baby boomer population. So accounting for accessibility is already hugely important and will only grow in importance over time. Accessibility has been a significant focus of mine for the last few years in product management, and taking part in the conversation around accessibility has been a truly enriching experience. As a product manager, I talk with librarians like Stephane and others often about what they and their patrons need from our ebook experience. And accessibility comes up frequently, even when that wasn't the initial intention of the conversation. And though sometimes it's a little challenging to have conversations about what may not be working optimally, I've found that all parties invested in accessibility are genuinely seeking the best outcomes for our users. And some of the most meaningful accessibility improvements we've made to our platform have originated from collaborative discussions with our librarian and user communities. A recent example of this was the addition of a skip to main content link on our search results, detailed record, and eBooks viewer pages, which allow users to get immediate access to the key content on a page. This was developed in speaking with librarians and end users about their experiences with our platform and with EBSCO eBooks. And we identified a need for streamlining the workflow to access eBook full text. We talked through options before landing on that skip to main content link, and it's been well received by our users thus far. Additionally, I work closely with our development teams on our online reading experience for eBooks. And every time we look to add a new feature, we ask how to account for accessibility. This includes doing research with users with accessibility needs to define the optimal behavior and meet their expectations, to building accessibility quality gates into our software development pipelines, and testing a variety of different scenarios across multiple assistive technologies. I was recently fortunate enough to participate in the 2018 Aspire project, which was championed by the higher education institutions in the UK, along with JISC, to evaluate the quality and completeness of accessibility statements from eBook providers. 54 platforms and 87 publishers were evaluated, and that was the accessibility statements that they provided. So what information do they make public about what works and doesn't work well with their content and platforms? And the average score for platforms was 5.5 out of 34 points, and the average score for publishers was 3.3 out of 35. So the majority of the assessments concluded that very little information is even available about a product's accessibility, like compatibility with assistive technologies, DRM limitations, and a remediation process. So it's clear that we have a long way to go. So when we talk about eBook accessibility today and in the future, we're talking about two things. And I thought it was interesting to talk about this a little bit, which Susan already mentioned and Stephanie did too. But there's really the two parts of it coming together: the content or the text of the book that the user wants to read, and the platform, or where the user finds and accesses that book. And since eBook files come from publishers, and access is provided by platforms like EBSCO in many cases, it's critical that the teams working on both pieces of that experience are building for accessibility. Now, since EBSCO doesn't own the content that we host, we don't modify the content we receive from publishers. So for that fully accessible eBook experience, eBooks must be made accessible by the publishers, and EBSCO must honor and support those features on our platform and provide for easy navigation. And as Susan described, content creators think about a lot of things to ensure they're providing for accessibility, using semantic tags like header and aside to identify sections of the ebook, including semantic markup like figure, and providing alternative text or captions for images and charts to ensure they can be understood by a non-sighted person. Consistent pagination is really important for navigation and wayfinding, especially in very long ebooks, but any document should have good consistent pagination. And the ebook format choice impacts the end user experience significantly. As we know, PDFs are very familiar and end users tend to be drawn towards them because of that. But EPUB is a format for ebooks that specifically supports some of the better functions for accessibility, including things like refillable text to fit any device's screen size, adjustable font size to make text easier to read for those with low vision, rich interpublication linking that provides for easy navigation, among other benefits. And all this is embedded in the publisher's content creation process. And so I really applaud the work Susan and her team are doing to bake this into the manuscript creation and submission process, because that sets us up for success. And what this means for platform providers like EBSCO is that our content pipelines must preserve and make available those accessibility features provided by publishers. And our web pages need meaningful structure and options to allow users to skip blocks or redundant information for easy navigation. And above all, our software must be developed and tested with various assistive technologies to ensure a consistent experience for all. and it must be updated to meet new accessibility guidelines as they're published. DRM protections must be balanced with accessibility considerations to ensure an equitable experience for all. DRM is often mentioned by our customers as a significant barrier to ebook accessibility, as it limits which tools can be used with a given ebook. And because we work with a lot of different publishers, EBSCO is positioned to see some emerging trends, some of which Susan touched on earlier. So I thought some of the data would be interesting to share with this group. We conducted a survey of EBSCO eBooks publishers and received responses from about 200 publishers altogether. And as I mentioned earlier, EPUB has great promise for ebooks and accessibility, and 69% of our publishers indicated they were creating EPUB, which is very encouraging from an accessibility perspective. And those publishers who create EPUB provide 87% of the title volume we receive. So that's trending in the right direction for accessibility, more content in an accessible format being loaded onto our platform. However, when we asked specifically about accessibility, about half of the respondents indicated they weren't planning to follow CAG 2.0 guidelines for accessibility in the next 12 months. And when we asked why not, the main reasons publishers cited were lack of staff expertise in accessibility or not enough time to train them, lack of knowledge about the different formats and their benefits for accessibility, technical or system limitations, so their production process not having anything baked in for accessibility makes it difficult to move forward with that, and budget restrictions, which could really fall into any of those buckets as well. And so when we look to the future for ebooks and accessibility, we see that there are still a lot of opportunities for us to partner to improve things overall. Ideally, our publishers could easily produce accessible ebook files in a cost-efficient way, and platform providers would have completely accessible platforms that accommodate every different kind of accessibility need with the variety of assistive tools in use at any given moment in time. And I do honestly think that if we work together, this future is attainable. And one of EBSCO's main areas of focus coming up will be working with our publisher partners to help close that gap I described. So where publishers lack resources and time to account for accessibility, we'll look to provide information about their ebook content files and suggest tools they can use to make sure their ebooks are born accessible, like the ACE EPUB checker Susan mentioned earlier. Another key area where EBSCO is looking to partner with our publishers is offering more EBSCO ebooks DRM free. When an ebook is wrapped with Adobe DRM, it can be difficult to use with popular tools like JAWS, VoiceOver, Natural Reader, and Kurzweil. Removing the DRM limitation makes ebooks compatible with more assistive technologies. Additionally, as we continue to evolve the EBSCO host platform, our ideal state is that everyone involved in the product and software development lifecycle is well-versed on accessibility and ensures our new features and functionality are equally available to 100% of users. And EBSCO is invested in making this a reality. As I mentioned earlier, we train our development and product teams on accessibility and how to think about it in a software context, and provide access to resources like DQ University to continue that learning. They learn how to write code that ensures a clear and meaningful experience for end users with screen readers, magnification software, text-to-speech tools, keyboard-only control, color inversion, cognitive disabilities, and beyond. And we're using automated tools like the ACTS Accessibility Checker to help validate that at a code level. That's an open source accessibility tool that you can plug into a software development process, which prevents code from going live with any accessibility issues in it. And so knowing that automated testing only catches a certain percentage of usability issues, we also rely on internal and external testers with accessibility expertise, manually validating our changes to ensure a robust experience. This is crucial to providing for accessibility and will definitely continue to be part of our process. And finally, and perhaps most critically, we really want to remain involved in the accessibility discussion in the library community. Presentations like this, discussions with librarians like Stephane and publishers like Susan really help close that gap and bring us closer together in understanding what everyone is working on, what our common challenges are. And working on things like the Aspire project and partnering with our publishers, libraries, and end users ensures we're prepared to meet the accessibility needs of today and in the future that will be set up for success. I think that's all that I had. So I just want to show, quickly, I have some resources as well for the attendees. So the Aspire project that I mentioned, there's a link there to the website for that project. The ACTS Accessibility Checker, which is, again, that open source accessibility tool you can build into your pipelines. It's really helpful information out there. Benetech's Born Accessible information for any publishers, and DQ University, which we're leveraging here to train our staff on accessibility. And so that's all for me. I think we're back to you, Matthew.
Great. Thank you. Emma, I'm just going to jump in here before Matthew does the Q&A and do one final poll question while people are thinking about the questions they want to ask us. What kind of accessibility inquiry do you support most often? So unfortunately, we don't have the ability to select more than one answer here for this question. So which one do you support most often, or what do you receive most often? Requests for remediated content files, confirming e-resources compatibility with specific assistive technology, supporting users in navigating the platforms, hosting the library's e-resources, or other. And please, again, specify in the chat what those others might be, if you would, please. Okay. Answers are kind of floating around here, nicely spread. Ellison says, I don't support accessibility inquiries. We don't have someone that can do that. Shanna says, request to benchmark platforms against WCAG. Looks like it's hovering around 23% request for remediated content files, 22% confirming e-resources compatibility, 45% supporting users and navigating platforms, 11% other. Steven says captioning for video. All right, thanks everyone. And with that, we can open the floor for questions, I believe. And Matthew, if you want to start out, there are a couple of questions that have already been sent in, and then we'll open the floor for more to come. Thank you.
Okay. The first question, do you use Kurzweil readers in the library?
This is Stephanie here. In the library, we have screen reader software on our public access computers. And we also have an assistive technology lab where students who have registered with the Disability Service Office can access, well, on the one hand, private space and private computers, and on the other, additional software. So I hope that touches on what you're asking. We don't have, so Kurzweil makes software that helps people reading and writing as well, and we stock that, and we have it on our load of the public access computers. So basically, we try to make different types of assistive software readily available for people to use, and then for people whose needs aren't met by that software list, we have additional options.
I'll just say, this is Emma. That's something that we do hear about from our libraries often as well. We get questions about Kurzweil and, which pieces of the experience are most compatible, and, questions about books being compatible with Kurzweil. So definitely one that, we hear about from time to time as well on the platform side.
Okay, let me go to the second question. Stephanie, how do you work with describing STEM content? For example, writing alt text for complex math equations. Something we are dealing with and struggling with for our own content is that it is created, content that is created, and when the library's ebooks are put into courses. Shall I read that again, Stephanie, or is that it?
No, I'm able to see the text, so I've got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the best resources around describing STEM content come from Diagram Center. That is also a project of Benetech. Benetech is a nonprofit, supports accessible technology and runs the Bookshare program. So they have extensive support materials about how to make your books accessible, and especially for educational publishing in the STEM disciplines. That would be the first place to look. There's also a coding language that's compatible within the EPUB MathML to directly insert mathematical equations. I know less about the status of that, but Benetech or Diagram also has the MathML Cloud, an online tool that you can convert an equation into an image with description or MathML or a plain language, like the way you would read it out. So they have a lot of great tools around that. And I'll also pass it along to other folks on the panel who have direct experience in this, perhaps.
I will just say that since we don't create content, we don't have a lot of expertise with this. I don't know if Susan was trying to jump in there, sorry, but I think you covered it, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Stephanie. We don't publish in math, so humanities and social sciences are really where our area is, so we haven't had to deal with a lot of STEM content yet.
Okay, I haven't had any new questions. Leah, are there other questions?
Looks like there was one that was in the chat box that I just added from Adina Mulligan, presentation about software called Equatio. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
Oh, there we are.
It was a comment about an earlier question, I think, rather than...
There was a presentation about software called Equatio for math accessibility recently. It's new and is exciting for our accessibility office employees because it's easier to convert accessible formats.
Any other questions from the audience? Let's see here. We'll leave it open for a little while. Matthew, did you have any additional comments or questions about the briefing title itself?
I think one of the interesting aspects of the briefing was Stephanie's discussion about how important different technology for accessibility has been, not just for people who have challenges with reading, but it's contributed so much in general for people's ability to access content in different ways. I wonder if Stephanie want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about that.
Sure. So for the research and the publication of the book, I went a little into the history of making books accessible for people with print disabilities in the 20th century. And a lot of the products of that work have become quite mainstream. So there's a huge program to create books, recorded books, recordings of humans reading books, first on vinyl, then cassette, and then through later formats. That's really the predecessor to the audiobook that many of us enjoy, and that's really seeing a boom after digital distribution platforms have come around recently. So we don't necessarily think of an audiobook as an accessibility tool if we also read print, but that's kind of the backstory to the format that we have today. Another kind of result of accessibility work in the 20th century is optical character recognition, a tool that we probably use every day if we work in an office, let alone a library. But the ability to scan a page of text and then use a computer to interpret what characters are there and make it machine readable text. I can't rehearse that history off the top of my head, but Kurzweil's in there too. But it's just interesting to see these sort of, not only the outcomes in terms of accessibility, but the kind of side products or byproducts of that work have become so instrumental to what we do, and then sometimes find their ways back into the story of accessibility. OCR is very important, of course, for the way we convert older print into usable electronic files now.
Looks like we had another question come in from the audience for Emma. How do you evaluate the accessibility tools to make sure they catch everything, like certain levels of accessibility and new standards?
That's a great question, Jessica. Thanks. So one of the good things about tools like the ACTS tool that I mentioned that we have in our pipeline is that a lot of them have a way to calibrate for different levels of accessibility. So you can target WCAG 2.0 level A, level AA, level AAA, whatever it is that you're targeting or trying to assess yourself against. So the ACTS tool that I mentioned allows you to do that. So you can say we want to target level AA compliance, and so it will check your code for that. And my understanding, because ACTS was created by DQ, which is an accessibility-minded organization, that they're keeping that regularly updated. And since it's open source, it would be able to be updated to meet any changes to the regulations and those levels. So that's kind of the great part about implementing something like ACTS into a pipeline, in that it keeps up with the industry, and then you can make sure that as you change your code, you're continually evaluating it against the latest standard. And that's, I think one of the benefits of using tools like that, where if we can all embrace particular standards and tools that meet them, then we're ensuring that sort of consistency in checking and resolving any challenges that might be raised by those kinds of checkers. And not to say that ACTS is the only one out there. I'm sure there are lots of great tools. That's just the one that has been the most aligned with what we're doing here and what our needs are. I'm sure there are lots of other good tools out there. And Susan, I don't know if that's something that Manifold also has any checking at certain levels, if that's something that might be valid on your platform as well.
That's something that I wrote down while you were talking to add to our list to run the code through. And there's certainly a question I'm going to take back to our developers.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have a new question here for Emma. Emma, do you run AXE tools on ebook files submitted by publishers?
Great question, Jennifer. So we don't run the tool on content files at this point in time. We have a separate process that we use to evaluate content files that are loaded onto our platform. And because that's sort of a content-driven process, whereas the ACTS tool is looking at code on our software, those are two sort of separate processes right now. And we have a different set of rubrics that we're using essentially to look at content versus the platform. So honestly, it's a great question. I think it's possible that you could run ACTS on, maybe EPUB formatted documents, HTML-based documents. Might be harder on something like a PDF. So I think there are other tools like the EPUB checker that Susan mentioned that might be a little bit more appropriate for evaluating content than ACTS, for example. But I'm going to look into that. So thanks for the idea.
No more new questions. Leah, are we done?
I think if there are no more audience questions, we can wrap up here. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and Matthew for being here, for their participation. I learned a lot. I'm really glad that we were able to do this together today. I'm going to put up a slide that does have some contact information there. The Charleston Briefings, if you'd like to read Stephane's book on accessibility and publishing, it's available at charlestonbriefings.com to read in its entirety. Then there's some email addresses to contact people with questions. And again, we'll have slides with those links to all those resources available on the conference website just within a day or two. So we'll have all those live links. And then there were some links provided in the Q&A or in the chat box rather. We'll try to put all that stuff up as well. So thanks again to everyone for participating, for being here today, for all your wonderful audience questions. And we'll see you again next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Bye.